The sky tore open with a silent flash as the drop pods began falling through the thick orange clouds of planet Verox, a hostile and savage world chosen by the alien overlords for their latest survival game, a twisted entertainment show where captured species from across the galaxy were released with nothing, not even clothing or language translators, just instincts and bare bodies. Dozens of pods slammed into the cracked jungle floor, spilling out confused and terrified aliens. Some screamed, some curled into fetal positions, others ran blindly into the dense underbrush. But one group stood up without hesitation. The humans, they had landed in a circle as if it were planned, even though it wasn't. Their eyes scanned the terrain, calculating. Memorizing one of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes snapped a thick branch and started stripping it down with a jagged stone. Another began rubbing sticks furiously against dried leaves. Without a word, the others spread out, marking boundaries, digging shallow pits, and stacking large stones for what looked like crude barriers. Within minutes, smoke rose from the human camp, not from destruction, but from fire, the first and only fire on the entire field of competitors. The other species noticed too. One reptilian alien covered in shimmering green scales hissed in disbelief as he watched humans boiling water, while his own kind struggled to move their cold blood through the alien. Humidity, a small spider-like species, tried mimicking the humans, but ended up burning its own silk in the process. Above the jungle, high in the orbiting game control room, a cluster of well-dressed alien elites observed the chaos. Through shimmering holoscreens, they laughed at the confusion of the contestants, but then grew quiet when they zoomed in on the human sector. One of the game masters, a blue-skinned, thin being named Score, tilted his head in disbelief. These mammals are using fire tools and hunting formations. Already another scoffed, impossible. They had no tech. We stripped them clean. It must be hidden contraband, but the scans showed no such thing. The humans had entered with nothing, and yet they worked as if they had trained their whole lives for this, not just surviving, but thriving. While others were barely coping back on the ground, the human group continued expanding their primitive fortress, sharpening sticks into spears and wrapping leafy fibers into ropes. One young man climbed a tree and began marking positions of water sources and predator trails. The human leader, a broad-shouldered older man with a deep scar across his cheek, didn't speak much, but his gestures were clear guard. The perimeter set the fire higher, sharpened more weapons. When a group of horned quadrupeds passed nearby, the humans didn't run or scream. They moved silently, hiding low, waiting until the danger passed, and then tracking the creatures from a distance. The other species had noticed the humans' progress. One pink-skinned alien with frills on its head approached the camp with cautious steps, only to be stopped by a woman holding a spear, not pointed at the alien, just held firm as a warning. After a moment, she offered the alien a piece of cooked root. The alien sniffed. It took a tiny bite in. Its eyes widened. It sat down nervously and ate. While the humans returned to work, more aliens began watching from the shadows. Some fearful, others jealous. The humans seemed to hold no rank, no visible leadership, yet they moved with perfect coordination, as if sharing a silent language. No mind links, no implants, just trust, experience, and hard survival instincts that had been honed across millennia on Earth. Meanwhile, in the control room, chaos brewed among the elite spectators. Some demanded an investigation, others suggested immediate disqualification. Score raised a hand. Enough, he said. We created this game to test the raw strength of evolution and survival. The humans are playing by our rules. They're simply better than we predicted. Better than us. The room fell silent, watching as the humans set up warning systems with swinging noise traps and defensive ditches. The jungle roared with distant threats, but the human camp remained untouched. Their fire burned brighter than ever, pushing back the creeping shadows of Verox and making even the fiercest predators think twice before approaching. By nightfall, the human camp had food, fire, weapons, and a watch rotation, while most other species were still huddled in the dirt or Dead from exposure, no words had been spoken, no grand speeches. Made just action, grit, and a will to overcome as darkness swallowed the jungle, a single alien. Girl from a feathered species stumbled toward the glowing warmth of the human fire, trembling. With fear and cold, instead of chasing her off, one human reached out and offered a hand. The girl paused, hesitated, and then took it, stepping into the light, not as a competitor, but as a soul desperate for survival. What she found was not just safety, but something her kind had never shown her before. A chance to be more, and from the shadows, dozens of watching eyes blinked in disbelief, wondering how the humans had done in hours what they could not even imagine in days. The game had just begun. But the aliens had already made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the species that had once hunted mammoths with sticks, built cities from mud and fire, and crossed oceans with nothing but stars to guide them. The species called human had not just entered the game, they were rewriting its rules from the first breath. The night on planet Verax was not quiet. It breathed like a living beast, growling from the depths of the jungle. Strange creatures howled in the distance, and the winds carried unfamiliar sense of danger and decay. Above the camp, the sky shimmered with glowing veins of purple lightning, but the humans sat still around their fire faces, glowing with orange warmth, weapons in hand, eyes scanning every shadow they had taken. Turned sharpening sticks into spears, while others wove long grass into tight coils to use as snares. One man with a quiet focus was carving symbols into a tree, marking their territory. The feathered alien girl who had joined them now sat close to the fire, too scared to sleep, her small arms wrapped around her knees, her wide golden eyes shifting between the humans and the woods behind them. She didn't understand their language yet, but she understood the calm in their movements, the quiet discipline, the way they watched over her like one of their own. A woman next to her gently handed her a smooth stone wrapped in vine fiber, a kind of toy, a gift to ease her fear. The girl hesitated, then slowly clutched it to her chest and breathed out the first calm breath she had taken since the drop elsewhere. In the jungle, the other species were not as lucky. A group of insectoid competitors had built their camp near a shallow stream, hoping the water would protect them, but it had only attracted a long, serpent-like predator with rows of burning red eyes and barbed tendrils. The stream turned dark with blood, and the screams echoed into the night. Another group, a tall race of telepaths, tried to mentally control the creatures that hunted them, but found to their horror that Verax was immune to their influence. Their minds were drowned in static, their confidence shattered. One tried to run and tripped over the root of a tree, only to vanish into a patch of crawling vines that moved like living fingers, tearing flesh without mercy. And high above them in the orbital control room, the alien game masters leaned forward, watching every screen with a mix of fascination and concern. The humans had not only survived, they were building a presence. Their fire was bigger than before. Their tools were sharper. They had formed patrols, sleeping in turns, rotating guards and adjusting traps, while others panicked. The humans planned, while others cried. The humans crafted. In the far edge of the jungle, a group of metallic-skinned warriors, known for their brute strength, approached the human camp with hostile curiosity. One of them whispered in his native tongue, "They are cheating. No species adapts that fast. They must have hidden gear." The others agreed and crept closer, blades ready. But before they could reach the clearing, one of them was yanked upward into the trees by a vine trap, followed by another who fell into a pit filled with sharpened stakes hidden under soft leaves. The rest turned and fled, realizing they were the prey, not the hunters. Back at the human camp, the girl had fallen asleep, her head resting on a pile of leaves shaped into a soft bed by one of the women. The humans didn't rest much, not because they feared the jungle, but because they had a system. A man climbed into a tree with a coiled rope and a sharpened spear lying flat on the branch, watching the path below. Another circled the camp perimeter, checking the line of noise. Traps made from hollow sticks and stones tied with vines. When a creature stepped too close, it triggered the line and the stones clacked together, warning the watchers but not revealing their exact location. This was not luck. This was survival. This was training that went deeper than just knowledge. It was blood. Memory passed through generations. Since the dawn of fire and fang and tooth in the morning, the jungle was filled with the aftermath of chaos. Broken camps, torn banners, trails of blood. The humans stood and observed silently. A few ventured out to help an injured creature half buried in mud, lifting it with care and bringing it back to camp. They did not ask questions. They did not expect thanks. They simply helped, even as they rescued. Alien flinched in fear. They wrapped its wound with strips of tree bark soaked in clean water and tucked a leaf bundle under its head. When it slept, one of the humans sat beside it, quietly whittling a stick into a sharp point, not to threaten, but to prepare. Around them, life buzzed. The camp grew stronger, larger. Other species began to creep closer, watching from the trees and bushes, not attacking, just watching. And listening, the humans ignored them, focusing on tasks, cooking root vegetables, filtering muddy water through cloth made of beaten bark, fixing traps broken by storms. They were not playing a game. They were rebuilding civilization with their bare hands, and every small act of progress sent ripples through the alien control room. Score paced slowly, arms behind his back, eyes locked on the main feed. "They are not just surviving," he muttered. "They are establishing dominance without conflict. They are shaping the environment like they have done on their homeworld for thousands of years." He stopped and pointed to the screen. "This is no longer a game. It is an awakening." And as the screens flickered, showing the humans handing a piece of food to a hungry alien child, another voice spoke from the dark, a voice none of them had heard in centuries. It said, "Maybe this time we created something we cannot control." And the room went silent again, watching the humans turn danger into order, fear into focus, strangers into allies, and death into survival, waiting for the next move that would shift the entire game. Once more the sun rose above the broken canopy of planet Verox, casting long yellow rays across the blood-stained soil and shattered hopes of many species below. Creatures that once believed strength came from tech, from privilege, from evolution, watched with growing disbelief as the humans who had arrived with nothing but their bodies and instincts now stood as the most organized force on the ground. Their camp was no longer just a ring of stones and fire. It had evolved into a functional base, complete with watchtowers, storage pits, weapon caches, and even a coded marking system etched into tree trunks to send silent messages between scouts. While most alien species still struggled to find water, the humans were purifying it, while others argued and panicked over leadership. The humans had established a system based not on rank but on ability. Each person had a role based on what they could do, not who they were, and they rotated duties to avoid fatigue or favoritism. This balance, this harmony, this terrifying efficiency sent waves of shock through the alien observation chamber, where arguments erupted like firestorms. Some demanded that humans be disqualified for bending the rules. Others insisted they be studied for future warfare protocol. Score, however, said nothing. His eyes were locked on the latest feed, where an alien from the copper-skinned Baloran race stood trembling before the human fire, asking in broken, basic language how to make sharp sticks. The humans looked at each other briefly, then without words handed him a stone tool and a stick, and showed him how to shave it down. The Baloran watched, confused, then amazed, and nodded slowly before returning to his people, who still sat huddled in the mud, afraid of everything the humans had just handed them. Survival knowledge without asking for loyalty, without asking for a trade, without speaking a single word of command. But generosity always comes with consequences, and far across the jungle in a shadowed grove, a meeting was being held between jealous factions, angry that their dominance was slipping the metallic-skinned warriors, the psychic Slithers, the elite tree walkers, all gathered in a cold huddle, whispering of sabotage and conspiracy. The humans are cheating one spat. They must have implanted forbidden tech under their skin before the drop. Another added, no species adapts this. Fast, we were born for war, and yet they thrive in chaos as if it is home. A third alien, dressed in shimmering armor, stepped forward. His voice low and venomous. Then we give them chaos they cannot control. And with that, a plan was set into motion. The next morning, while the humans prepared their tools and taught another alien child how to twist bark into cord, a new arrival appeared, a young, thin alien with purple scales and a limp. He stumbled into camp, claiming to have escaped a predator. Attack, begging for help. His eyes were wide, his breath short, and his wounds fresh. The humans took him in without question, offering food, rest, and care. None suspected that he carried more than wounds. Hidden in his belt was a shard of alien tech. A small crystalline transmitter rigged to call in hostile fauna with its pulsing frequency. That night, while the humans slept in shifts, while the girl with feathers told stories to other rescued aliens. Using hand signs and smiles, the device hummed softly deep in the supplies buried beneath a pile of leaves and bark, and the jungle began to respond, not with sound, but with silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that crawled through the trees and slithered into the hearts of every living thing. The traps triggered, the alarms clanged, and the humans awoke, spears in hand, eyes wide as shadows moved faster than ever before. Monsters, born of nightmare, poured into the camp, drawn by the signal that whispered of prey, not just meat, but souls. The fight was brutal to humans. Went down one, dragged by a beast with 6 arms and blade teeth. Another crushed under a falling tree. Pushed by a charging predator, but the rest held the line without panic. Without screaming, they formed defensive circles. Used the fire as a weapon, burned the creatures with torches, and drove them back inch by inch, even the alien refugees. Now part of the human group fought beside them, throwing stones, stabbing with crude tools, copying what the humans had taught them. By the time dawn broke, the camp was drenched in blood, but still standing, the corpses of night terrors. Burned in a pile outside the barrier, and the transmitter was found, its crystals still blinking. The wounded purple alien, now tied to a tree, sobbed, in fear, admitting everything he had been promised: safety by the jealous factions if he could weaken. The humans from within, the humans did not scream at him, did not strike him. Instead, they gathered around the grave of the fallen protector, who had died shielding the feathered girl. They buried him with hands on his chest and whispered words in a language none of the aliens understood, but the meaning was clear: honor, lost, memory. One of the oldest men among the humans took a small stone, carved with strange symbols, and placed it in the dead man's hand, then turned to the gathered aliens and spoke with eyes blazing: survival is not just strength, survival is trust, and you broke it, but now you must choose: rebuild it or face what comes alone. And with that, the camp returned to work, rebuilding, regathering, preparing, because humans did not just survive betrayal, they rose from it, stronger, wiser, more united than before. And above, in the control room, score finally spoke these creatures, these humans, they are not playing our game. They are rewriting it with blood and bone and fire, and the galaxy is watching with breath held, waiting to see what happens next. The jungle no longer feared the humans. It respected them. Where once birds scattered and beasts hid, now silence followed them like a shadow, not of dread, but of reverence. The scent of fire, the rhythm of tools, the thump of feet patrolling with calm force had become part of Varix itself. Even the vines seemed to grow differently around the camp, as if bending away from the place where structure had taken root. The humans had not just survived, they had changed the nature of survival entirely. Now, small camps began to appear, not just from the humans, but from other species who watched, learned, and copied a tribe of once panicking insectoids now had clean water pits and had learned how to dry meat using leaves and fire. Another species, once known for pride and isolation, now sent their children to The humans, for lessons in hunting and tracking, one of the human scouts had started carving simple pictographs into flat bark to teach through images instead of words. The feathered girl now walked freely, speaking a mix of human words and her own language, forming bridges between minds that had never touched before, even the once wounded. Purple-scaled trader had now begun helping, tending wounds, gathering roots, digging small channels for water to pass more efficiently. Forgiveness had not come easy, but it had come, and with it a quiet shift in power. Above the jungle, the control room was no longer calm. It shook with debates. Furious claws slammed against tables, voices roared. One accused humans of cultural contamination, another said they were merely efficient players, a third said they were a virus spreading unwanted unity. But Score stood watching the screen where dozens of alien younglings now sat around a single human woman as she showed them how to build signal fires and how to knot ropes for catching game in the wind. The voices behind him became noise unimportant compared to what he saw, because this was no longer a survival event. It was an evolution unfolding in real time. Down below, the humans had begun something new. They were building towers, small ones made from stone and hardened mud, with lookouts high above the trees where scouts could watch the horizon for days in advance. They had created a code of 3 tones, blown through hollow horns, that could signal danger or discovery across miles. A group of alien warriors approached the human gate, asking not for alliance, but for guidance. They dropped their weapons to the ground, not in surrender, but in humility. One human stepped forward, lifted the smallest of the weapons, examined it, and handed it back, nodding once, as if to say, "Begin again." Correctly, others watched this moment unfold, and it spread like wildfire, not of destruction, but of awakening. The humans had done something the creators of the game had never expected. They had become leaders, not by force, but by function, and that terrified the wrong people. From the shadows outside the camp, a new group emerged, aliens who had stayed hidden this whole time. Watching, gathering, waiting, they had not joined the game for glory or survival, but for power. They had remained silent, building their own force, waiting to strike. And now they saw the unity forming, the influence the humans had earned, and they decided it had to end. But they did not attack, not yet. Instead, they began to whisper, moving through camps, telling other species that the humans would dominate them, that they would soon become rulers, that the fire of Earth was too dangerous to share. Seeds of doubt were planted, and some ears listened carefully, unsure, afraid. A crack in unity began to form, barely visible but growing. One night, while the humans taught a group of alien children how to make flint blades, a small explosion rocked the south wall of their camp. Flames burst through the trees, and screaming followed, not from the humans, but from an alien outpost that had mimicked their design. Now it burned. The humans ran toward the fire without hesitation, grabbing water skins and wet leaves to smother the blaze, lifting bodies, carrying wounded, dragging survivors from the flames they saved lives. Even as suspicion rose around them, when the fire died down and the smoke cleared, one alien elder turned to the humans and asked, Why save us when we do not trust you?" The human leader paused, then held up his soot-covered hands and spoke slowly, "Because we do not need your trust to do what is right. We need only the will to act." And that moment spread further than any sabotage. It echoed in minds in silence, in the small decisions of individuals who began to question the lies they quinked, the lies they had heard, not because they were told, but because they had seen truth with their own eyes. The humans returned to camp, worn and burned, but unshaken, and they began rebuilding the burned wall, not just theirs, but the one that protected the neighboring alien camp. To others saw and came to help. Silent at first, then with shared grunts and nods, the feathered girl, now taller, now more confident, began organizing children into cleanup lines, her voice carrying words from 2 languages at once. And high above, Score leaned back from the screen, his voice low to no one in particular. They gave these creatures a jungle, a nightmare, and in return, the humans gave them order, tools, safety, They gave them hope, and hope is far more dangerous than any weapon. And as the jungle wind carried the scent of ash and new fire across Varix, every species felt it a change, irreversible, undeniable. The humans were not just survivors, they were builders of something that had never existed before, and it was only the beginning. The jungle had begun to whisper, not with wind, but with words. Voices from the shadows moving between camps, spreading old fear wrapped in new stories. They say the humans want to take everything. They say the humans will build a wall around the fire and lock the rest of us outside. Some listened, some scoffed, but all heard it, and deep in the heart of Varrox, the quiet watchers, the ones who had waited for chaos, stirred. They had seen enough. They would strike, not with brute force, but with misdirection. The humans had become a symbol, and symbols could be broken. The humans, however, continued, as always, building, teaching, healing. They did not stop to defend their reputation, because they had no time for pride, only purpose. One morning, a scout returned, bleeding his back, torn by claws, his breath shallow. He collapsed before the fire, and with one final word, he warned ambush. Then his eyes closed forever, his name carved into stone, placed at the camp's edge with the others who had fallen not as victims, but as protectors that night. The humans prepared silently, no panic, no shouting. They moved like shadows, packing supplies, reinforcing defenses, whispering orders. A small alien child tried to help and was gently handed a rope to pull as part of the team. Even in danger, the humans made others feel useful, not helpless, and the ones who followed them followed with hearts full, not with fear, but with fire. Before dawn, the attack came. Dozens of armed aliens swept through the jungle, roaring blades flashing, strange beasts under their control. Their plan was not to defeat, but to destroy, to burn the human camp and shatter their image forever. But the humans were waiting, not behind walls, but in the trees, in the tall grass, in the trenches they had dug days ago. Every trap, every tactic used, every alliance honored in that single moment. Where all threads pulled tight, the battle was brutal. Fire lit the sky, screams filled the air, but through it all, the humans fought not for glory, not even for survival, but for something deeper. They fought because they refused to become what their enemies believed they were. They fought because others had placed their hopes in them. And hope was a burden, not easily cast aside. In the middle of it all, the feathered girl, now fierce, now fearless, saw a beast charge toward a wounded alien child, and without thought, she threw herself forward, spear in hand, cutting deep and driving it back. She screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. Beside her, a human fell, blood spilling across the leaves, not from cowardice, but from standing in front of danger with open arms. He had shielded a stranger and paid the cost. His name would be remembered. The traitors were pushed back, not by strength alone, but by unity, by the sheer, unshakable wall of shared will. They fled into the jungle, their leaders cursing the humans, not for winning, but for refusing to become monsters. When the smoke cleared, the camp stood wounded, yes, but alive and stronger than before. The wounded were cared for, the dead honored. The traitors were not hunted, but left to their shame. And the child, who had been saved, sat beside the fire, staring at the bloodied hands that had lifted her from death. She reached out, took the hand of the fallen human, still warm, and whispered, "Thank you," in broken words. She did not understand fully, but felt completely, and the others watched and understood. Something deeper than any rule of the game. The humans had not won the fight by fighting. They had won by refusing to let hate dictate their actions. Above, in the control room, silence reigned. Screens flickered with scenes of shared food, broken weapons being reforged together. Children from 5 different receipts by 5 different receipts times from 5 different receipts had not won the fight by fighting. My leave, my leave, my leave, my live of seas, my leads, my lies, my live is spelled. My read sive, we sieve. Pine my live, my said, my live, it live, we seen my leave. to see what I lead up. Lie, I go inside. Be sick, I go at sick, cut to kai, it's sick, to get it to click, to sit, to sit, to get to put it to start, to get to put it, sit, and take the tick, the key to taste, the fellow with these cated, but I think that's say, if it beats, species painting the same image, a human hand open, not closed. Score turned from the screen and said to the others, "You see now what power truly is. It is not in control, it is in choice." They chose to suffer rather than become like us. They chose to share rather than conquer, and that is why they are feared, the elders argued, protested. But none could deny what had been seen and felt across the system. Broadcasted into the hearts of millions who watched the games expecting death, and instead found dignity, the camp buried their fallen with carved stones and fresh branches. The feathered girl painted the face of the protector with colors from crushed fruit, a symbol of honor that would be taught to her people forever. The humans stood, not as rulers, not as warriors, but as something more, as examples, and even those who once doubted now stood beside them, not as equals yet, but as learners, and in the jungle wind carried a message not spoken but known. The fire would not dye the tools, would not rust the weapons, would not be turned against the innocent, and in the ashes of betrayal rose something far stronger than any blade. A bond that could not be broken because it had been forged not in blood alone, but in sacrifice and choice. And truth. The sky above Verox shifted its colors, bending from orange to deep violet, as if the planet itself sensed what was coming. The trees stopped rustling, the air grew still, and the animals vanished into silence. Then a sound unlike any other tore through the clouds, a deep, vibrating hum followed by a beam of light descending from the heavens. It struck the ground near the human camp, carving a perfect circle into the earth, and from that light emerged a figure tall, clad in shimmering armor, not one of the contestants, not one of the watchers, but a herald of the game. The aliens gathered at the edge of the camp, watching with wary eyes. The humans stood still, weapons in hand, ready, but not aggressive. The herald's voice echoed across the clearing, amplified by unseen forces. "It is time," the voice said. "The final trial begins. Now only one species may win, only one flag may rise, only one will leave this place with the right to live above the others." The words struck like thunder. Across every camp, allies looked at each other, uncertainty blooming, trust tested, fear rising. The humans said nothing at first. Then the elder among them stepped forward, his face lined with loss, his hands stained with work. He looked at the herald, then at the crowd, and shook his head. "We did not come to raise flags, we came to survive. We built something greater than victory. We built peace, and peace cannot be won by war." The herald did not react, only raised a hand, and vanished into light again, leaving behind a symbol carved into stone, one path leading to the exit, the other to destruction, chaos. Return not in fire, but in minds. Across the planet's confusion and betrayal surfaced. Again, alliances trembled as some species turned their eyes toward the humans, not as friends now, but as rivals. A faction broke off during the night, fleeing into the dark, taking weapons and supplies with them. Another group approached the camp, asking in whispers, "What will you do?" The humans responded not with orders, but with choices. Each person spoke their thoughts. Some wanted to fight, others wanted to surrender, but the elder spoke last, and his words settled over them like a calm sea. "We were never meant to leave alone. We were meant to change the meaning of the game. We were meant to end it, not win it." And so the plan began, not to destroy, not to dominate, but to unite, truly unite. The humans sent envoys to every camp, not with weapons, but with empty hands and shared food. They told stories of the first fire, the first trap, the first grave of a human who died saving another. They offered knowledge, tools, maps, survival tips. They reminded the others not of fear, but of what they had already become together, not competitors, not strangers, but something new. Some rejected them. Some spat at the ground and turned away, but others listened, others remembered, and when the time came to choose between the exit path and the old path of conquest, small groups began gathering near the human camp, not to fight, but to follow the herald returned, this time with others observers. Judges, architects of the game, all descending like stars fallen from the void they watched. With blank faces as the humans stood surrounded, not by enemies, but by former rivals. Now standing together in a massive circle, species of all kinds, eyes locked, not on the exit, but on the sky. The herald's voice trembled for the first time. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be consumed by fear, by greed, by ambition, not by unity, and yet here they stood with nothing but unity as their strength. The judges spoke in tones older than sound. The rules are broken, the purpose failed, the game ends now. One of the observers stepped forward. But what do we do now? They asked. The humans did not answer with words. They built a pyre, not of bodies, but of weapons, broken blades, shattered traps, burned banners. They lit it as the symbol of their choice, and the fire rose higher than any flame seen on Virox. The final message, not one of conquest, but of closure across the stars. The broadcast spread faster than light. Species that had watched expecting bloodshed saw instead a new path, a new possibility. The game was over, but something greater had begun. From the ruins of survival came something living, something breathing, something undeniable, and the humans stood at its center, not as rulers, not as winners, but as the ones who dared to be more in the end. The exit path remained unused, untouched, for no one needed to walk it. They had already left the game without taking a step, because they had transcended its purpose and rewritten its laws with their hearts, their hands, and their unbreakable will above. The jungle, the skies opened, not with thunder, not with fire, but with silence. A silence deeper than the void itself. Every observer, every system, every watching species leaned in closer, drawn by the final image beamed across the galaxy. The fire in the jungle burned tall, not from war, not from destruction, but from broken weapons and shattered fear surrounding the humans. Were species that once hunted each other, now standing shoulder to shoulder, not bound by rules, not forced by fear, but united by something ancient, something powerful, something real. The heralds, the watchers, the game lords, all stood at the edge of their own creation, staring at what it had become. The game they had designed to exploit weakness had instead revealed strength. The final decision no longer rested in the hands of twisted architects. It now rested in the people, the ones who had walked through flame, through betrayal, through death, and had come out holding life in their hands. The humans gathered around the last standing tree, the oldest in the clearing, its bark marked with every name of the fallen, every friend, every stranger who had died so others could live. The feathered girl stood beside the human elder, her hands covered in paint, symbols drawn on her arms, not of her people, not of his, but of both. They spoke not of endings, but of beginnings. High above on the orbital platform, leaders from dozens of civilizations gathered not to command, but to listen. The broadcast continued without pause, showing acts of survival, acts of mercy, acts of unimaginable transformation. Score now stood at the center of the platform, his voice quiet but steady. What you have seen cannot be unseen. What you have learned cannot be denied. They were supposed to be the chaos. They became the balance. They were supposed to be the threat. They became the answer. This is no longer a contest. This is a mirror, and what we see is not just humanity, but the best of all of us amplified through them. One leader stepped forward from the Telvar collective, once proud and cold, and now trembling with something unfamiliar. We feared them because they acted without fear. We hated them because they gave without asking. We called them dangerous because they reminded us of what we lost. Another voice from the Shira mindnet spoke next. We once believed unity came only from shared thought, but now we see it comes from shared struggle, from sacrifice, from choosing others again and again, not because it is easy, but because it is right. The decision was made not by vote, not by law, but by recognition. Humanity would not be elevated above the others. They would not rule, they would not control, they would teach, they would lead not with commands, but with example. They would share the fire and anyone willing to warm their hands was welcome. The surviving humans were brought aboard the diplomatic vessel, not in chains, not in armor, but in honor. And every station, every state, planet, every corner of the galaxy tuned in to see them walk through the silver doors of the Galactic Council for the first time, not as a lesser race, not as a warning, but as a signal. The age of division was ending. The human elder stepped forward to the speaker's circle, looking out over thousands of eyes, all shapes, all colors, all waiting. He carried no speech, no script. He only raised one item. A small charred spear carved from the jungle and held it high. We did not come here to teach, but we will if you ask. We did not come here to rule, but we will walk beside you if you let us. We did not come here to win. We came here to prove that no matter what you strip from us, you cannot take who we are. He placed the spear down on the council table, then stepped back. Not another word needed to be said. In the days that followed, changes spread fast. Walls came down, ancient wars paused, broken treaties were redrawn with new ink, and human voices now echoed in places where their name had once been a curse. The feathered girl, now older, stood on a school platform, teaching young minds from many worlds how to use tools, how to build, how to understand. She wore no medal, no rank, but her words shaped futures. The purple-scaled trader, now a healer, traveled from world to world, showing how forgiveness could build bridges sharper than any blade. And the jungle on Verax remained untouched, sealed not as a battlefield, but as a monument to the moment the galaxy changed. The fire still burned there, fed not by destruction, but by memory, by legacy, by unity. And when young explorers looked into the night sky and asked their elders, what happened on that world? What made the stars shift in their paths? The answer came simple and strong. That was the day the humans showed us what it meant to survive. Not just the jungle, not just the game, but ourselves. And that was the day the galaxy began again. The jungle was quiet now, not from fear, not from defeat, but from peace. The kind of silence that follows after storms, after battles, after long nights, where everything could have fallen apart, but instead came together. The fire in the center of the human camp no longer burned with urgency. It glowed soft and steady, a heartbeat in the earth, a reminder of what had been built and what could never be erased. The old tree still stood, its bark filled with names carved in dozens of languages, some shaky, some precise, all sacred. Around its roots were stones placed by children, aliens, humans, former enemies, now students, now family. The humans did not leave the jungle with flags or trophies. They left with something far heavier. The memory of every soul that had trusted them, followed them, stood beside them in the darkest hours, and the galaxy remembered it, not with cheers, but with quiet reverence. One by one, new species arrived on Earth. Not to conquer, not to spy, but to learn. They came with questions and left with fire in their hearts. The same fire that once danced over broken branches in the shadow of monsters. The humans shared everything, their traps, their tools, their stories, even the old mistakes. They made it clear survival was not about perfection. It was about the choice to keep going, to help to rise again when there was no reason left to rise. They planted seeds of unity in places that had only known war. They built schools from starships, turned weapons into bridges, made water flow where only dust had lived. They changed not by command, but by invitation. And slowly the stars themselves seemed to bend toward this new way, not by force, but by gravity, the kind that only truth and sacrifice can create. Skor, now retired, walked among the trees of Verax, once a battlefield, now a sanctuary, his steps slow, his eyes heavy but bright. He touched the old tree, ran a hand across the names, closed his eyes, and whispered a thank you not to any god or system, but to those who had believed in something better. Beside him walked the feathered girl, now grown, a teacher, a leader, her hands calloused from work, her voice calm and clear. They said nothing to each other, but their silence spoke of peace beyond words, and above them, stars. Linked in patterns, new constellations, drawn not in lines, but in shared. Light ships passed overhead, not as fleets, but as caravans carrying tools, stories, laughter, generations. Touched by that one impossible moment when humanity showed the galaxy. A new path, and every world had to decide whether to follow, and most did. Not because they were forced, but because they were ready. And in the end, the question was never who would win the game, but who would refuse to play. By its cruel rules and still come out carrying hope in both hands, the jungle remembered the stars. Remembered, and the future remembered too. Not with fear, but with fire, the kind that builds, not burns, and at the very edge of it all, where stories become. Legend and legend becomes truth, one voice, always. Remains whispering through the leaves, through the silence, through the stars, the end.